Do you want your business to grow faster? Are you open to new and out-of-the-box ways to drive revenues and increase value? How do you imagine the most successful entrepreneurs and business leaders double, triple, or expand their businesses tenfold or more? The answer is Deals. This is a weekly podcast featuring conversations with business owners, executives, and leaders as we reveal behind-the-scenes details that give you, our listeners, the confidence to pursue your own deal-driven growth. On this show, we discuss a huge variety of deals, everything from large, complex mergers and acquisitions, capital raising, joint ventures, strategic alliances, real estate, affiliate and sponsorship deals, franchising, and more. My name is Corey Kupfer, and I've been supporting deal-driven growth for businesses for over 35 years as a successful entrepreneur, professional negotiator, and attorney. My goal is to help you strategize, plan for, find, and complete deals that will help your company grow faster. Welcome to the DealQuest Podcast. Let's get started. DealQuest community, I'm so excited to introduce you to a new format or a new thing we're going to be doing on the DealQuest podcast. As listeners who've listened for a while, or maybe there are some of you have heard all 400-something episodes over the last 8 years. I don't know if you're out there, please message me and let me know when you started listening to this podcast. So we're going to be doing a quarterly feature, which we're going to kick off today in a little looser format that it'll become, but we're going to be doing a quarterly feature with my partners, Meegan and Sara Mostafa. And so I have the benefit now of having Brian joined a few years ago and Sara joined this year, of having folks that now have a combined 40, 30, and 20 is 90 years of deal experience. I guess if we get it 3 years and change a little more in, we'll have 100 years combined. And yet we love deals. We love talking deals. And we thought it would be good. Most of you know that what the rhythm has been is to do 3 guest interviews and then a solo cast, and 3 guest interviews and a solo cast. I've had Brian on as a guest a couple of times. I've had Sara on as a guest. But we thought it would be cool to create this quarterly feature where the 3 of us come on. We get to talk about what's going on in the deal market, what we see, what's being reported, actual experience, some of our own deals, and a cool segment that Brian's going to preview, in this one as well, which I'll save until we introduce it. So the first thing I want to do is reintroduce my partner, Meegan, and our newest partner, Sara Mostafa. So hopefully everybody can welcome them. And if you haven't connected with them, if you're a client or one of our industry partners or whatever, hopefully you guys will connect soon. I know Brian's had some more years here to get to know a lot of folks, in our ecosystem, and Sara's new to that. So we're excited for this. So let me start off with saying, hey, okay, we continue to be busy, right? With deals, we see that. And, Brian, just what are you seeing overall in terms of, let's say, this last, or 2026, since we didn't do one at the end of first quarter, we're coming, as we're recording this, almost to the end of the second quarter, recording this in late June. What are you seeing in 2026?
Well, I think the story is what I'm not seeing. We ended that year, and you and I talked about projecting out that we would enter into a period of maybe greater predictability, greater stability that would lead to a kind of release of some of this pent-up demand because deals have been at a lower clip the last couple of years, which there's a certain sort of regular need for transactions as people do things and leave or retire or whatever it is. And the fact that it had been suppressed for a couple of years would indicate that there's built up, pent up demand for those deals. And with some more predictability and stability and ability to see out beyond our headlights a little bit, the expectation is that this was going to be a banner year. I guess we've got more unpredictability in different areas that we couldn't have foreseen for a myriad of reasons that we don't need to go into on this podcast. But I think we're all aware of, energy prices and things like that have had this disruptive effect on not only our overall economic production, but on deals as well. And the impact of interest rates, with the expectation that those were going to start coming down regularly, and now they've kind of, settled in for a little while, and we may even have some indications that they could even rise into the future. So for all those reasons, we're not seeing the big bump in transactions that we expected to.
Yeah. Now, we always have to do a little asterisk in terms of the overall deal market, but a big asterisk for us in that the wealth management space is a exception to all of that. Deal flow continues, the maturing industry and the PE money. And certainly we have closed deals in other industries as well. So it's not like there aren't deals going on, but the sort of pent up boom that we thought was possible, yes, I don't think that's happening. Sara, I know you've definitely closed some deals, even in the few months that you've been with us outside wealth management industry. Tell us a little bit about what you're seeing.
Right. I'm seeing that the smaller and mid-market type deals are still pretty active, especially where the target has successfully integrated AI into operations. I see that the valuations are still pretty high. The private equity, the demand is still there. I personally, in my practice, haven't experienced much of a slowdown, but again, that's, a lot of the smaller and middle market type transactions that are still super active in my experience.
Yeah. And I don't think that's really as inconsistent as it might sound. Like what Brian and I had talked about previously was not that, and now it's not that we're saying this is a significant slowdown, right? We thought there could be the conditions when things settle out for like a real boom, and that hasn't quite manifested. But but listen, it's still pretty robust. We got a lot of stuff going on. It's not a slow down market, that's for sure. It's just, I do believe there's still pent up demand out there and people are still waiting. Like there could be more deals if things settled out a little more. Yeah.
I will say, even with that though, I will say that there is I think a less frenetic pace,
yes,
even that there was last year to get things done and closed. Having said that, with respect to the deal flow that we have, which continues to be active, I feel like there is a less sort of aggressive pace towards closing with some of the deals. And it's really hard. I wouldn't put that on anything in particular in terms of, the energy prices and all these other sort of macro events. But I do see some consistency in that. So I'm not sure what that comes from. And it could be temporary. It could be just limited to some of the things that we're seeing right now. I'm not sure.
Yeah, we definitely have some days that are, oh, good, Sara.
I would say where I've seen the more aggressive pacing is where the founder or seller is basically seeking to exit as quickly as possible. Then we're certainly on a shorter term target for a close. Yeah. But I generally see what you're seeing as well, where at least on the buy side, there's not as much of that accelerated desire to close immediately.
Yeah, I feel like I think about some deals we have going on now, and it feels like they're all still going to close. It's just
yes.
Like whether it's the Q of E that's being done or it's the due diligence process that's being done or whatever, they're just happening a little more slowly. There's not as much of an intensity to rush that, which listen, is not necessarily a bad thing. I mean, especially on the buy side, sometimes speed to close could lead to not doing the kind of due diligence or that you should. So it's not necessarily a bad thing. And again, I don't think we've seen a lot of the deals dying. They're just not as frenetically paced.
Yeah.
Right.
All right. So, so that's interesting. I mean, it's funny because obviously this is going to be a theme always, no matter what we talk about, what we're seeing generally in deals, obviously different industries, different segments, different things are affected by different, and there's going to be sort of growth or retraction or speed differences and everything. And obviously, like, for example, energy prices going up are going to affect some industries much more than others. So you always have to take anything we talk about with a grain of salt because any given industry might be reacting a little differently. But that's what we're seeing overall. I had I had recorded a couple episodes of the podcast today. I was actually catching up from being traveling a while. And one of them that you'll see coming up after this, I'm pretty sure it's going to air somewhat after this podcast, is one I recorded with Andrew Dunlap, who has an interesting focus on investing. So they are looking to build like a mini Berkshire Hathaway. They focus on Virginia deals right now and longer term holds, right? And committed to building sort of leadership capacity and keeping companies in second tier or smaller cities, right? And not have the talent drain because, it was an interesting stat that he told me. He discovered that in Virginia, there were 82% of the buyers were out-of-state buyers. And then even in this day of more remote work, it still makes a difference where HQ is. And when you have an out-of-state buyer, the top leadership talent tends to move, out of state. So it was really interesting take there, a commitment to keep businesses local And frankly, he's been leveraging that. So that was something that was interesting for me to hear, to look at somebody who's a longer-term investor dedicated to and has raised a fund and is dedicated to investing in a specific geographic area and to, help employment and leadership talent in that particular location.
Interesting. Separate topic. I was having a conversation with a friend of mine who's in the space industry. You were talking about the fact that the multiples in that industry right now are absolutely insane. Not unlike AI, where people are chasing perhaps more aggressively than they should. In the case of AI, space is hot and they are commanding some high multiples right now. So we're keeping an eye on that. We've got out here in Colorado, and I know in California as well, there's a pretty robust space industry that has already developed here. And, we've got Lockheed Martin out here that generates a lot of that activity. So that was interesting to me.
Love it. And listen, obviously you have the SpaceX, IPO and, which flew up and now it's come down, but it's still, I think, above its IPO price.
So to speak.
Yeah, exactly. No, there was literally no pun intended. And obviously that, although the interesting part is, with the combination of what Elon did there, you sort of wonder whether, is it the space part? Is it the AI part? Is it SpaceX is not just space anymore. So interesting to see where the value is going to come out of that one.
Yeah, well, it was within the same week that they did the IPO that they announced that they had purchased the AI development company, spacing the name of it. But that seemed like a left turn. That's not core mission kind of activity. So I'm wondering if people looked at that and said, boy, this is not about space. This is about AI development. And, is he using extra cash that's generated by the public offering to make acquisitions through this entity versus another one that he has available?
We just saw Google purchase that AI film company, which again is not on point with mission. And actually the antithesis of what Google's been saying from the beginning about their, viewpoint on AI. So I think everybody's drinking the Kool-Aid at this point.
It was a $60 billion all-stock transaction for AnySphere. And acquiring AnySphere, the startup behind the popular AI coding agent Cursor. So that's what people generally know it by as Cursor. But the company is called AnySphere. And listen, that's one of the things that happens is that you now have this public stock currency that you can use. And that's one of the things that companies that go public do is they use that equity currency, which now has a public valuation to do that. So yeah, that's interesting. So Brian, we'll introduce this segment that you had suggested that I think is going to be a lot of fun that we'll be doing on each of these, which is deals in history. What do you got for it?
Yeah. I'm a bit of a history nerd anyway. Being a deal nerd on top of that, I felt like the cross-pollination of those two factors had a little juice. So the idea would be to talk about different transactions, whether those are something that has to do with business or politics or what you name it, that have happened across the span of time, and maybe glean something from it. Maybe it's just entertaining, but I don't know where it's going yet, so you'll have to give us feedback on it. But I figured the first one to start with was one of the more dramatic ones. We've all heard about different situations in which people try to take advantage of environmental factors to gain an edge in negotiating. The spotlight, speaking with someone, or raising the table over, or the chair so that the other person is sitting lower, all sorts of these little mind games and things like that. Well, the negotiation of the armistice of the Korean War had all of that. In 1951, both sides had sort of come to this understanding that they hadn't discussed with each other, but individually, that they probably weren't going to be able to unify Korea militarily, and that they were going to have to figure out how to exit this thing and negotiate some sort of peace treaty, which interestingly doesn't exist today. It's not actually a treaty. It's just an armistice. It's a ceasefire. Right. And that's what it's been since the end of the Korean War. But besides that, it was a situation in which when they finally agreed to start to talk with each other, and there's a long history about, what the Russians were doing and the Chinese and the Americans, but suffice it to say that the political will to keep fighting from all the major players, other than Korea, the North and South Koreans themselves was like, we're kind of done at this point. Like, we want to get out of this. Well, when they first started to meet, there were little factors. So they met in a town that was in the North Korean territory, but close to the 38th parallel. And I guess when they went to pick up the UN team, they brought cars to pick them up, to drive them, which all had white flags on them, indicating that they were coming in to surrender. Okay. Something that the North Koreans did to sort of gain the advantage. They also used the tactic of the higher tables. They used higher chairs to try to gain advantage. The negotiations stalled out a number of times, one of which was who's going to enter the room first? What's the shape of the table? So a round table would indicate that they were all on equal footing. And the Americans and the Chinese, Chinese thought that was a great idea to be equal with the Americans immediately post-war, like kind of raise their profile. The Americans would have that. A long rectangular table would indicate that there were heads of the table and not heads. So who's going to give ground? Eventually, they came to separate tables with a table in the middle that had the documents, and they all, they came in at the same time. The size of the flags had to be measured and agreed that they were going to be equal size because they both kept trying to put larger flags on their side. Absolutely insane for all this. And finally, there was a period of time where they were trying to negotiate the actual boundary. And there was apparently a 2-hour period of time where both sides sat in the room in complete silence, not budging, because the American side said, we want it at this point. And the other side said, we have no response, that we have nothing more to offer. And so they both sat there scowling at each other for over 2 hours.
Wow.
Like, all of these things happen in that one negotiation. And it just goes to show, obviously they finally made it through, but all those tactics were employed, and nevertheless, they were able to get through it. Obviously, a lot more people died during the 2.5-year period that in 160 meetings roughly that they had to get through this. But that was certainly a notable negotiation in history.
Let's take a break from the show for a minute so I can tell you about an incredible resource my team and I have put together for you. Secrets of Deal-Driven Growth, Creative Ways to Grow Your Business Even in Challenging Times, is a powerful ebook that helps you take DealQuest podcast episodes and apply them to your own life and business. This is the ideal tool for anyone looking for creative ways to grow as deal makers, and you can get yours now. It's as easy as heading to coreycupfer.com/workbook and downloading your copy. While you're there, you can also consider joining our dynamic deal-driven community of founders, experts, small business owners, and entrepreneurs. Now back to the show. Wow. I had the extreme sort of gift and blessing of spending some time with William Ury, who, among many other things, is an international peace negotiator, co-founder of the Harvard Project on Negotiating, co-author of the classic negotiating book, Getting to Yes, amongst other, books. We walked the Abraham path with him, my wife and I, in 2017 in the Middle East, which is a path that an NGO that he helped form, mapped out hiking paths, walking paths throughout the Middle East, 35 miles of trails. And it's really based upon where it said Abraham from the Bible, who's, the father of 3 of the major religions, Christianity, Judaism, and Islam, is said to have walked, and he was known for hospitality, for just connecting with, with different people.
Radical
I got to walk with
hospitality.
William and hear about, he's not a guy who tells stories or brags, whatever, but if you ask him, he'll answer a question. And it's always got to be about stuff for a long time ago, because like for all, I don't know that any of this is true, but for all I know, he's the kind of guy who could be, right, dealing with Russia, Ukraine right now, or behind, the Middle East, negotiations or whatever. Like, he's that kind of guy. He dealt with, say, with Chavez in Venezuela, but of course you never know that he's involved in that kind of stuff until, decades later when it doesn't matter anymore. And so, he would tell some of these stories, and, and it's that kind of thing. It's sort of like, and you do have the political element to it and the cultural element to it. And how you get through to some of these people, these dictators and whatever, and get to the humanity and, and find a way to get something done. And, when we do deal negotiations, there are always stakeholders, right? There's the buyer, there's the seller, there's the money, there's the individual people there might be other key players. But when you're talking about international politics and wars and things like that, I mean, the number of stakeholders and the stakes are, unbelievably high and complex. And it's, it was a fascinating and wonderful experience to spend some time with, spent a week with William in the Middle East.
That sounds amazing.
It is so important to be culturally aware, especially with cross-border transactions, because that'll get you half the way, more so than the technicalities of the terms or anything like that. Just being aware of cultural norms and how you're supposed to go about the negotiation is ultra important. And I think practiced and understood sometimes better in some, maybe Eastern cultures than it is amongst a lot of players in the U.S., at least at present time.
Yeah, I mean, those comments remind me of, I'll go back to a less of a deal in history like Brian talked about, but let's say a deal in Corey Kupfer, history.
Well, that goes back quite a while.
It does. That's, we're talking about 18 times. I know. So it was, an interesting early deal. I was a few years into my own practice. So maybe I set up my own firm 6 years out of school. So maybe, it was 8-9 years of practice. This was in the early 90s. And this is just after the Soviet Union fell. I'm forgetting what year that was. So whenever that was, early 90s, I think it was. And so they were first starting to do deals outside of, Russia and the other former Russian, communist in the U.S., countries in the USSR.
Yep.
At the time, I remember they were, most of the deals being done with barter because they didn't have any cash, right? like international currency, access to dollars. I had a client that I represented who was a guy who sourced goods. And there was a Russian group that came in and they had a huge tanker ship, and they filled half of it with tons of Purdue chicken, which we had nothing to do with. And the other half was filled with, it's really, really funny because it's stereotypical. It was blue jeans and cigarettes and electronics mainly. And right. And this again, at that time, it was all the American stuff that they wanted in Russia, couldn't get my client at that time was the guy who sourced all these goods. And, what is very typical in these kind of deals is that you have something called the non-circumvention agreement, which says, hey, I'm going to introduce you to all these suppliers and manufacturers. I'm the middleman. You're not going to go around me and do a direct deal with them because obviously I'm making the introductions. I want to get paid for helping to broker that, right? Very standard provision. Well, the Russians would not sign, we were at a standstill in the negotiations because the Russians would not sign that. Why? Because they had just come out from under communism and they were now capitalists and they were not going to be told who they could and could not do business with. Now, here's the interesting part about it. The interesting part about it is that you might say that's ridiculous, but if you really thought about it in that particular time, right, in that cultural moment, right, in that, the sort of oppression they had come out of and now they're finally free to do business, that was not a negotiating tactic for them. That was a fundamentally held, belief, right? And so one of the things that's maybe an extreme example at a particular time, but, whether it's logical to you or not, right, to understand where somebody's coming from and understand that they were serious about that and they were not going to budge. I mean, we went back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. And then, so I remember saying to my client, listen, you're not going to get this. So let me tell you what we're going to do. The truth is your ability to force this against Russians anyway, right, is going to be slim to none. So what we're going to do is we're going to lock it up. We're going to get those agreements from all our U.S. suppliers that we're introducing them to, who, by the way, have U.S. presidents who we can sue if they breach it anyway. And we're going to go around and do that behind the scenes. And then in the meantime, and then what we're going to do is we're going to negotiate this hard. We're going to give it up in exchange for a bunch of other stuff we'll get, right, to give in to them, but we'll be protected on the other side. And that's exactly what we did. So, it was a way where we could respect their very strongly held wishes, despite the fact that it may seem illogical to us, but also, be able to protect the client and get the deal done. And we filled the other half of the ship and got it done. And as far as we know, I never heard that they try to go, maybe they try to go around it, but they never did because all the U.S. suppliers were locked up, in agreements that said they wouldn't deal directly. So
I never realized you sold cigarettes.
Yeah, apparently that was part of it. They wanted blue jeans and cigarettes and electronics.
Yeah.
Back in the day. All right. So, any other interesting stuff that we have? Obviously, as listeners know, we can't talk about with names any current deals or what's going on. We have attorney-client privilege. But anything that either you working on that or have recently worked on that's particularly fun or interesting, or any other things you're seeing that you think the audience might want to know about?
I'll go. I had the opportunity to do some traveling recently, both to the Middle East and to India for both business and personal reasons. And having nothing to do with that, although while I was there, I was able to discuss the appetite for investment into the U.S. And in the Middle East, there's definitely a significant amount of interest in breaking into the U.S. markets. And I would say even more so from the folks that I talked to in India. To that point, we're working on one right now, that part of the world that you've got investment coming over, looking to roll up a series of businesses here onto a platform. And I definitely think that perhaps it's a reflection of the state of the rest of the world relative to the U.S. But I know that from, some of the positions, doing deal exchange for the Entrepreneurs Network, this is also a change. And actually, I don't mean to be talking about more travel, but like I was in Vancouver with a different group, an international group of law firms that we're a part of, and talking to the Chinese contingent. And they all talked about the fact that for the first time since China, kind of has really emerged as an economic powerhouse, Chinese investors are looking for opportunities to invest in the U.S. That flow of money is not going into China as much as it's looking to go out and to the U.S. in particular. And there are a number of goals. There are some dollars that can go easily. There are some dollars that cannot. There's a lot of regulatory issues with that, but all of them were saying, I'm now looking out west. We're looking to the U.S. to find opportunities. So I thought that was interesting.
Yeah, I mean, listen, we do a lot of, for a firm our size, we have very strong international contacts, right, between all our EO friends around the world. Brian and I have been in EO a lot of years combined, and Brian's International Lawyers Network. And, we're fortunate enough to work with companies that are coming into the U.S. We have U.S. companies that are doing business overseas. I had one prospect we talked about who's waiting for a potential distribution arrangement in Brazil, and we're able to call in our colleagues there. So I think that's definitely an area that we've done a decent amount in over the years. And yeah, we're definitely seeing some strength there. Any thoughts on that, Sarah?
I was going to say what I've dealt with recently, actually, in a couple instances, a bit different, but plant, nutrients is an industry where I've been seeing a bit of a boom, and I've, clients involved in that field, and they, have developed these basically operations, south of the border, be it in Mexico or Costa Rica or elsewhere, where handling deals essentially with the American counterpart operating company and the offshore operation, and trying to figure out, and of course, there's regulatory issues that have to be addressed. But in addition to that, there's the aspect of certain top talent from some of these regions that are interested in being retained by the American operation. And then what does that look like? The issue of, should we issue equity versus should we grant phantom equity? And, all those issues relating to, often the desire not to proliferate minority owners and all the rights that come with that. And then, but it's to be phantom equity, what are the vesting triggers? What are forfeiture conditions that might apply, and so forth. And that's kind of been the theme of some of the things I've been working on lately.
Yeah. It's good. It's interesting. And it's hard, just in this day and age, it's hard not to, everybody looks at this stuff through a political lens right now, but outside the political lens, just from a business lens, I mean, no matter what the policies are, I don't care what you're in favor of or against or whatever. The truth is, we're seeing more and more cross-border and international stuff getting done, right? Despite certain desires to onshore more and whatever. And I'm not saying that's not happening, in terms of the risk of distribution chains, things like that happened during COVID. There is a movement to, in some industries to have more stuff more close by. But it's just, I think, the nature of the connectivity of the world and humanity. And if you just look at what's happened with the virtual assistants, in various places. And I think even that is just a entryway like as firms are more successful in using and outsourcing some, more repetitive or lower level or admin tasks, they get more comfortable, with that. And then you find, that there's talent elsewhere. And there's certainly wage, arbitrage, and you may have judgments against that one way or the other. But, there's one thing I always say in business is that, whatever you like or don't like or believe or don't believe or for or against from a political or other reason, whatever, the smart business people figure out what is happening, whether they like it or not, and then, react to what is really happening, whether they like it or not, because those are the real conditions, those are the real trends. And, if you get left behind, and listen, if you make a moral decision or a belief decision that you don't want to do something and you understand the consequences of that, I respect that. Like, I don't have any judgment on it. But if you sort of let, other factors sort of blindly have you not pursue something and your competitors are doing it, you better be aware that there could be a risk of that.
I think that's one of the 7 habits, or baked into one of those, that you have to see things clearly and objectively. And regardless of how you feel about it, you got to recognize what the reality is and then deal with that however you choose to deal with it. But don't come in and color it before recognizing what is.
Yeah, you can make a conscious decision. It's different. But yeah, so I think there's huge international opportunities going both ways. We're fortunate to have a great network, on that. And listen, the truth is, the higher end, the money is always going to find the opportunities, and and it's not, most of it's not going to be restricted. And then I do like the counterbalance. Like I mentioned, this guy, who has this fund that focuses only on Virginia, right? I think there's room for all of it, and opportunity for all of it. Depends upon where your focus is, where your connection is, and what you care about.
Absolutely.
Great. So, all right, I'm going to make this up on the spot. So that means I'm going to put myself and Brian and Sara on the spot a little bit, because I just decided that in this new format we're going to close it out with a segment called Parting Shots, or Parting Wisdom. Okay. As I try to think about what my parting wisdom will be, because I made this up, I get to go last. I'm going to look at Brian or Sara and see which one of them is willing to jump in on the spot and give us some parting wisdom. What's your parting shot, Brian or Sara?
You want to go first, or you want?
I guess so. I could go. I would say the light of especially women-owned businesses and minority-owned businesses, where there's deficiency in access to capital and various other issues. I would suggest not giving up and instead looking for your community. There are, Corey just talked about specialized funds for specific regions, specific purposes. There are funds available specific to women-owned businesses, specific to minority-owned businesses, and not just through the SBA. So, look at what's out there. Try to connect with a community, with a network of like-minded individuals or of other women-owned businesses, and try to use that as a resource to start and to grow your business, because it might seem like a daunting task, but there are resources out there, and I would encourage everybody to try to seek those resources.
Awesome. Brian.
Do a couple things. Back in 2009, I had the opportunity to listen to Jim Collins, who we all know. And he, at that time, we were in the depths of coming out of the Great Recession at that point. We were in there and we weren't yet coming out. And he said, never waste a good recession. He talked about when things are down or difficult, that's the time to upskill, to hire people that you wouldn't normally be able to hire, because when the times are good and people are scarce, you can't get those top quality people. But on a labor market that seems to be slower, this is the time when you can find those people. This is the time that you want to, if you're looking, with an eye towards the future, this is the time to be able to invest and get more for your money, more for that investment than you can in other times. And then sort of disjointed from that, with all of the talk about AI, I would say pay attention to this growing concern around the cost of tokens and the efficiency that AI, or the lack thereof, that AI may bring. Because as these companies stop supporting the financial offerings, and subsidizing the cost of this, and they start to show us what the real cost is, I think that there's going to be a further shift. So as you think about what you're investing in and everything else, keep in mind that cost changes are likely to come, and that's going to yet again reshape what we think about AI, how we use it, where we use it, and where it's useful and where it's not.
Love it. I guess my parting shot is I'll start out with something that I have mentioned before, but it's a core belief of mine. So since the first time we're doing this, I'll talk about it. And I have a talk that I call "There's a Deal for That." My parting shot is that any business frustration, challenge, or issue that you have, there's a deal for that. Doesn't mean you should do it, but if you're having trouble hiring, right, in addition to going through recruiters and posting on sites and giving you employees, get referrals, whatever, maybe there's an acquisition or an acqui-hire you can do. If you want to expand into a geographical area, yeah, maybe you start that organically, but maybe you acquire, maybe you do a joint venture or a strategic alliance, right? There are so many models out there. White labeling is an underused model. You don't need to understand what the deal is or what it looks like. All you need to understand is that you have a business frustration issue, opportunity that you can't or you're not adequately handling, or you want to handle more quickly or more effectively or more at scale than you can organically, and then come to folks like us and say, okay, you said there's a deal for that. Here's my frustration. What is the deal or the deals for that? And we can certainly help you figure that out. That's my parting shot. So folks, listen, I hope you like this new segment. We're going to be doing it quarterly, and I'm thrilled that I get to do it with my partners, Brian, Meegan, and Sara Mostafa. And I'm excited to do this with them. I'm excited to continue to build the firm with them, with the great team that we have, and we're excited to serve all the amazing people that we do. With that, I will see you next week with another interview, and we will all see you next quarter for our next Roundtable M&A update session.
Thanks, Corey.
Thanks, Corey.
Thank you for joining me on this episode of DealQuest, where we help you understand how deal-driven growth can be your ticket to freedom. If you are interested in finding out more about my law firm, the services we provide to entrepreneurial and growing companies across industries all over the country, and my partner Brian, Meegan, and I, and my amazing team, just head over to kupferlaw.com. That's kupferlaw.com. And if you want to follow more of my content, head over to my LinkedIn page where I post regularly. I'm Corey Kupfer. Until next week, wishing you the freedom and financial prosperity that I know your DealQuest will bring.